Welcome to the Startup of the Year podcast, where each episode we showcase exciting new companies from around the world. This podcast is produced by Established, creators of the Startup of the Year program. Established is focused on helping organizations with their innovation, startup, and communication strategies.
Welcome back to the Start the Year podcast. I'm Frank Gruber, the co-founder and co-CEO of Established, co-founder of Established Ventures, and the team behind the Start the Year community and this very podcast. Thank you for being here today. I'm super excited today to talk to Gary Kusin. He is the co-founder of GameStop, co-founder of Laura Mercier Cosmetics, and the former CEO of Kinko's, which actually ended up getting sold to FedEx. And I still call it Kinko's, but either way. FedEx, and he was actually the CEO that came in to turn it around and sell it to FedEx. And he's also got a new podcast called Leveling Up with his co-host Jill Louise. And he's just a seasoned entrepreneur. He's a business leader. He's made a huge impact in retail and beauty and gaming. And he's got a new book. It's called Always Learning: Lessons Leveling Up on GameStop and Laura Mercier. And it's just a really interesting glimpse into his career. He's got a storied journey, starting up. As starting from high school on, he really just kind of meandered his way into all these interesting stories and things, and just always learned and continued to push forward in anything he did. So it's a really compelling and inspiring story, and I'm excited to have him here today to talk to me about it and some of the things he learned in his leadership style, which is in the book and can be applied to anything you're doing. So anyway, I don't want to spoil it. Let's just jump in. Before we jump in, though, with Gary, I wanted to mention all those startups out there that are interested in being part of our summit. Startup of the Year Summit's coming up. We're going to announce the location pretty soon. It's been a secret, right? We've been keeping it under wraps. But if you're interested in being a company that is involved in the actual summit, just go to startupofyear.com and apply today. The deadline's coming up in May, and I want to make sure that you get in there. So please do apply if you've got an early stage company. All the specifics are on the website. And we'd love to see you at our next summit. What do you get at the summit? You get opportunities to engage. You get an opportunity to connect with new founders, as well as new investors and mentors, exposure through potentially even winning some of the awards they're there, and just a great experience. So hopefully you'll join us and be a part of it. All right, now let's jump in and talk to Gary. Welcome, Gary. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. You have such a really storied history and background of working with different types of businesses. It really was fascinating to read your latest book. And could you start off by telling the audience a little bit more about your journey and what inspired you to write Always Learning?
Sure. As you noticed from my book, you can call it a checkered past. You can call it anything you want to, but what it is a lot of very different things. And that plays into my whole personal narrative, frankly, of my life. I was approached after I sold Kinko's to FedEx, book publishing company, thought I should write a book on my career. I literally started for a week and quit. And fast forward to today, I started thinking about my grandkids. I started thinking about it. I probably ought to document this because no one kind of knows it better than me. Mm-hmm. And as I started writing it, I realized that everything fit together to end up with my leadership principles, which I delineate at the back of the book. And the book kind of describes by stories in my career how I evolved from who I was, a government major at the University of Texas with could barely spell business, to the background that I've had since then. And I was told by a lot of people, makes fascinating, interesting reading, and you ought to do it. And so I got all inspired, and sure enough, I mean, I literally banged that book out in 90 days. I pounded 1,000 words a day for 90 days.
Wow.
And it was in my head, and I would get on my Peloton, think about what I wanted to write, and after I was through with my time, race into my office and start pounding. And I loved it. It was actually an extremely joyful experience for me to put it all down on paper.
Well, it's interesting. It even starts, early in your life with, through high school. And you've always had these kind of like intricate like stories about people you've interacted with, which are historical people, like not just like random people. Like, I think there's, the story of Ross Perot and as well as, was it EJ?
Uso.
So yeah, right. So there's always got these like random, just different interludes where you're like, these are really interesting people you've interacted with across your life. It reminded me a little bit of Forrest Gump, not to be offensive in
I
any way.
used to say, but I used to say I feel a little bit like the Forrest Gump of business. I mean, I was doing quarterly business reviews with Jack Welch. Where did that
Right.
come from? I was doing skits with Bill Gates at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Who would have thought?
Right.
And on and on and on. And you're right. It was so I felt it's so funny you said that.
Mhm.
And finally, frankly, my editor said, there's so much more intention in your book. You need to drop the Forrest Gump thing. And I went, oh, I've been saying it my whole life. I don't know if I'll be able to drop it. So I dropped it. You immediately
Well,
mentioned it.
it resonates. I mean, it really does. But I think about like your stories are just so interesting. So anyway, let's dive in a little bit deeper here and
Sure.
think about like, you know, getting started here. Your kind of your inspiration was obviously get this out, but then what are some of the core themes for the folks that are out there that want to go pick it up? And want before they do, they're like hesitant maybe because they don't know what it's about.
Well, the core themes kind of from the title. I kept my own counsel very much as a child. And as I grew up, I kind of didn't trust anybody but myself. So I was always thinking. And what I realized was I was absorbing more about the world around me than I might have otherwise had I not been so guarded with my life. And I realized that I was learning. I was learning a lot. One of the good things about being a Forrest Gump type and having a checkered past, or I couldn't hold a job or whatever you wanted to call it, I developed a pattern recognition that most people, it's hard to get unless you've been involved in the array of things I've been involved in. And what I realized was the longer I've been at it in business, the better my batting average has gotten on being able to look at a startup business plan, to look at $1 billion company that might be an acquisition target, and everything in between, and understand the subtleties of body language, and how that fits into numbers, and how investment theses can maybe not match the corporate culture of a target company. So I started developing a patterns, and it started really serving me well in roles even at TPG. I spent I what I call carried the keys. I was CEO for over 25 years.
Wow.
And when I stopped and became a senior advisor at this major PE firm, TPG, where I was no longer carrying the keys, but was perhaps a board exec chair or in charge of coaching up the CEOs, these stories enabled me, and watching the company enabled me to be a better advisor than maybe I would have been had I not have had the array of experiences. And they all also, I learned from the bad experiences as much as I learned from the good ones, and moved towards this set of leadership principles, which for me are my North Star in business, whether I'm a board member, whether I'm just looking at an entrepreneur's business plan or anything else. So I wanted to be sure that the reader didn't get to the end of the book and say, well, where the heck did that come from? I talk about the very specific instances where I learned, whoa, lack of respect for others is poisonous in a corporate environment. And that led to a leadership principle of respect for others,
I
not
appreciate that.
respect.
I appreciate that. I
So,
appreciate how you broke the book down and had these key elements in each chapter. Like at the end, you kind of these kind of
yeah,
call outs of what the takeaways were. I think it helps the reader as you go along. So definitely really enjoyed the book and thought that these, obviously it's a great guide for anybody that's coming off of anything because of your background. You didn't start thinking, oh, I'm going to go to business school. You
yeah,
literally figured it out along the way. And I love your story in there about how you literally applied like in July for that same
yeah,
year and didn't even think about it and just thought it
yeah.
would get in and more or less had to like break the door down
And
more or less to get in. It's faster, which is fascinating.
yeah, and the same thing relative to graduate business school, because I did have a government major at my brother's wedding of all places up in Wichita, Kansas.
Mhm.
Everyone kept pointing to this guy and said he's the richest man in Wichita, Kansas, and he went to Harvard Business School. And by 3 days later, I've heard it 100 times, and I'm going, Harvard Business School rich, Harvard Business School. I know what I'll do. I got an idea. I'll go to business school.
Yep.
And so you're right. I mean, it's a lot of serendipitous circumstances, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And nowadays, like, I don't think they'd take that same approach. They probably gotten a little harsher these days with Harvard and all that, but pretty amazing that you got in there that way, and love the story there. All right, so let's dive in a little bit further to one of you've started in a lot of different businesses, right? One of the more I guess infamous one or storied ones is GameStop. It's gotten more interesting with the recent stock related stuff that happened with it, with Reddit and all that. Can we, didn't start as GameStop. I wanted you to kind of bring us through that journey of how that got started,
Sure.
where you were, because it was
And
early. It was the first gaming like store.
first video game store in the world.
Yeah.
And it obviously colors my view, but it makes me, and if you look at how I came up with the idea to start Laura Mercier Cosmetics, they both came from the same place, which is hard analytics, you really deep analysis of a potentially new industry, if you will, or a new type of in-home entertainment, and on and on and on. When we started GameStop, it was a study group mate and my closest friend at business school, and he finished at the top of the class, and I was the other bookend of it. But we got to be very close through our Friday night poker games, and I tended to be a little better at poker. And so as was happened back then, when you finish at the top of the class at that business school, he ended up a partner at Bain very quickly. And because I wasn't sure, who's now been my wife for decades, I wanted to be sure she would marry me. And so I asked her if she could live anywhere in the country. Where would she want to live? She said San Francisco. I went to the placement office. Department stores were hiring, so I went to the department store business to start my career. So when I asked her to marry me, I said, no, by the way, I've got a job in San Francisco to kind of hedge that bet. So I came, and as it ended up, good choice on my part, because 6 years later, I was the youngest senior merchant that had ever happened in the nation in large department stores. And so I had developed a point of view before I knew how to spell video games, that in any category of consumer goods that reaches measurable size, the specialty store channel will become an important, if not dominant, channel of distribution. Yeah. All kinds of examples, from all the stores, the Gap, the Limited, Zales Jewelry, grocery stores. I mean, you can name almost every category of consumer goods. I was trying to convince Federated Department Stores, which is today called Macy's, that we had to get out of this different names in different parts of the country and go to one national flag, or we couldn't compete with specialty stores. And I was running into a brick wall, so I was frustrated. So Jim comes to town, and Jim had replanted himself from the Bain Boston office to the Silicon Valley office, and he had a couple of early video game publishing clients named Electronic Arts and Activision. And so he started learning about this nascent thing, which was essentially Moore's law at work on semiconductor chip capabilities. And it became clear to him was the capabilities of semiconductor chips was doubling so quickly that the graphics and gameplay that would be able to come into homes in video game players were such that it would be a new sector of consumer electronics, and had every earmark of one that could become global. Yeah. So I'm saying to Jim, well, that's interesting. And I said, that's interesting. Let me tell you what I'm seeing in the world of department stores. I am seeing the emergence of specialty store chains, which, by the way, if you just narrow it to consumer electronics, hi-fi stereos came out in the 1950s. And by the 1960s, record stores were emerging as the dominant channel of distribution for records. And I said, and then Blockbuster starting in Dallas. So I had a front row seat. And I said, they're emerging to handle Betamax, VCR tape, movies that you can watch in your home. I said, Jim, this is going to be as big as you think it's going to be. We've got to get first mover advantage. We've got to create a specialty store chain that does nothing but sell video games for video game equipment and soon software for personal computers used in the home. Way early. We immediately dropped what we were doing, went to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January of 1983. And I wandered the floors as a senior merchant talking to guys who had started their video game software in their garage, selling floppy disks in Ziploc bags, all those sorts of things. And I came away from it going, yeah, this is going to be big. Mm-hmm. And Jim and I both decided no partner had ever left Bain. He decided he would quit. They offered me, I was at the ripe old age of 31, I was offered the CEO of a major division of Federated Department Stores just to stay. And we both left.
Wow.
And came together. And we couldn't call it software, by the way. Mm-hmm. We couldn't call it that because the word software didn't exist. And to the extent it did exist, it was in women's intimate apparel. So,
right.
That's why we defaulted to the name of a 18th century Victorian England entrepreneur named Charles Babbage. So we could tell people this is not he invented the computer. I mean, 19th century, he invented the computer. They called it the difference engine in the mid 1800s. So none of this, you should not be intimidated by this. And that's how we approached it. But then the time came, everyone understood what software was. The name was dated, and we were buying our biggest competitor, and their only requirement was we refused to be named Babbage's. They were software, et cetera. Right. We said, great. And we refused to be software, et cetera. So we had to come up with a new name, and that's how we ended up with GameStop. But so,
I mean, it's right time, right place, but also your history of knowing the industry. Like you came really from a retail industry, which, working in all these different department stores that you saw, the actual things that were happening in real time. Yeah. And so we're able to kind of apply it.
And Jim was seeing it on the technology side.
Yeah.
So between the two of us, we knew we were onto something. We were onto something very early. Mm-hmm. And the only question was, is it too early? And both of us want to chunk, which were highly successful early careers. And now being in our very early 30s, or we really want to walk away from exceedingly high paying jobs in a great career path to take a flyer on something that people didn't even know what software was. And the answer was, yeah, if you'll do it, I'll do it. And we were, hell yeah, we'll do it. And off we went.
The startup life. Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, you had success with that company, and then ultimately started another company, cosmetics company. So Laura Mercier, is that how you say it?
Mercier. Laura Mercier, who's a real person.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah. And I went through the exact same process.
Yeah.
Coming up with that. Because I'd also being the senior merchant, I was also in charge of all cosmetics. And I was fascinated by cosmetics. And actually, as a merchant, before I knew anything about the video game industry, I had studied the history of cosmetics. Mm-hmm. And it had gone through 3 iterations over the prior 50 years. From makeup artists was the first wave. The second wave was technology labs, that kind of stuff. And the third wave was fashion. And all of a sudden, my buddy, who is CEO of Neiman Marcus, starts telling me about a Canadian firm named MAC Cosmetics, which stands for Makeup Artists Cosmetics. Mm-hmm. And then he told me about Bobbi Brown and another line called Trish McAvoy. And I started thinking and went, oh, the cycle's going to come back around to makeup artists. If I can put together a professional team and attack this professionally, mm-hmm. we might have a leg up on makeup artists who tended to be outstanding at what they did, but not really knowing how to build businesses.
Right.
And that's what I did. So Terry Lundgren, the same person who at Neiman's, told me about this woman, Janet Gerwich, and he thought she could become a great co-founder and could be the outside while I was the inside, use my money, her as the outside, me as the inside. And that's what we did. I talked to her. She said she wouldn't do it. I said, well, I'm going to do it with you or without you. And she said, okay, then I'll do it. And we went from there, and it was a great run in that company till I had to sell it.
Right. But that also shows another theme of just being ahead of the curve. I mean, you're constantly, like you said, finding trends ahead of people, and I think that's one of them. Like now, you're seeing every celebrity influencer out there launching their own cosmetic brands and turning them into billion-dollar businesses. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's something to be said for that. All right.
Yep.
So let's keep moving here. In the book, you
Yeah.
emphasize this continuous learning. It's very obvious from the stories in the book, and you're kind of like figuring things out as you go and more or less applying it immediately. Can you share like a little bit of like maybe a strategy or any kind of habit that kind of helped you, be a lifelong learner?
Not sure about a how or why of my lifelong learning, but I've always been curious.
Mhm.
And as a child, I used to try and work through problems on my own because I didn't trust anyone to tell me. So uh, I spent a lot of time in growing Babbage's and then in growing Laura Mercier. It ended up by, gosh, before Kinko's, I got a call from American Airlines that said I was their number one flyer in the world. And
Wow.
that underscored for me the amount of time, because I spent incredible hours on airplanes flying all over the world and staring out the windows and thinking, doing nothing but thinking about how did I find myself where I was? Was it a good place? Could it be a better place? What do you have to do to make things better, either where you are or find a better opportunity? I had so much quiet time on airplanes.
Mhm.
And I think that is really, and I enjoyed it. And then I switched over and decided I'm thinking too much. I'm going to take a step back and read every book I've ever wanted to read on airplanes, because this was before the internet was available on airplanes. And I started devouring books and started thinking about, as I was flying around the world, what was I reading? What were the takeaways?
Mhm.
And it is probably all tied to all of that. So I do that until today. I mean,
Mhm.
I when someone says, why do you write the book? There's a lot of reasons, but I love always learning.
Mhm.
And I knew that this process I would enjoy because I was learning something, whether I sold the book or not. I love learning. And this is completely unique in my career. I'm running out of things that are completely unique.
Mhm.
And this was one that was stimulating, challenging. I have a daughter who is a published children's book author,
Oh.
sold a lot of books in that industry. So I've
Mhm.
been able to watch her, and I was thinking that would be unique. I would like to do something unique, and that's what I've been doing.
Oh wow. Do you mind sharing who that is? I have a daughter as well. She's younger. So we're reading children's books all the time. I'm curious if we're reading your books.
Caroline Kusin Pritchard.
Okay.
She is in the stable at Simon and Schuster.
Mhm.
Although Disney has now bought a book from her,
Oh wow.
she's venturing out. Everyone, her first book was called Giddy and Fetch, which
Okay.
is a story of a little girl and her pet parrot. She's extremely optimistic, and the parrot's extremely pessimistic, and they have experiences together. So great fun, and
They work it
teaches.
out.
Yeah, and teaches great lessons to young kids. And
That's
she was a teacher before she did it, so it's great.
That's great. I'll have to check it out. Well, that's amazing. All right, so let's keep rolling here. Let's talk a little bit about your leadership style and your experiences, and I think how that's like those diverse experiences have affected your leadership style, and maybe talk about some of those principles that you mentioned in the book.
Sure,
You don't have to share everything
sure,
because we want people to read the
yeah,
book, but
yeah,
whatever you're comfortable with.
sure. So I think the most important thing, actually, the most important idea is almost at the introduction. I believe in my core that everyone carries around their own baggage that has every good and bad thing that's ever happened to them in their lives, and they carry it around with them. And that baggage creates a prism through which they view the world. If their baggage is full of very bad experiences or things that hurt them, their prism, their view would look very different than a person whose baggage is full of good things.
Mhm.
And so my belief is I know what my prism is, but I don't know what yours is. So who am I to tell you what you should do? I don't, that word should doesn't work for me. And so I have always, my whole goal, especially when I've recruited senior teams, because a lot of people have looked into this. I have a result out there that apparently is pretty unique.
Mhm.
13 people on the senior turnaround team at Kinko's became CEOs. And the question becomes, what in the heck were you guys drinking at Kinko's that enabled this to happen? And it didn't happen by accident. When I interview people, I like to understand aspirationally what their goals are. And to me, the most exciting thing to hear is when someone says to me, I want your job. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of that. And I don't care if someone doesn't have a burning desire to win, but I care a lot if that person who doesn't have a burning desire to win refuses to lose. And those are two incredibly different characteristics in a person. So when I build a senior team, everyone has to have one of I will win or I refuse to lose. And they all have to have aspirations to become CEO. So then my job becomes, if I have all these highly talented people who believe in themselves, my job is reducing all the barriers for all of them. And I believe I've been able to successfully do that. And I also believe, because of the success, that if you put together a team like that, and then you just make sure they have every tool they need to do their thing, you're going to have a really good outcome. And so that is truly how I've assembled teams. And the feedback from that process has been such that it feels like it works.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I mean, do you teach a class? You should be teaching a class
somewhere.
somewhere.
Frankly, I have taught an ethics class as a guest speaker in business schools all over the country. And it foots back to honesty and integrity. And it foots back to the story of my head of real estate in the early days at Babbage's. It was like our 300th store, something like that. He was submitted an expense reimbursement form, and on it was $800 spent for 4 bass fishing boat trailer tires that the inspector in the city of Cleveland shook him down for in order to get a green tag. And my CFO brought me this and said, do you know what this is about? And I said, no, but let me ask him. And I asked Barry, I called him in. He said, you told me I had 2 jobs this year because we were trying to open 70 stores. You said on time, on budget. If I didn't get that green tag, I would not be on time. And I had money left in the budget. And I'm not hiding it from you.
No.
I put it on there. Well, what do? I did tell him it was 2 things. And I throw that to the class. So what I do is I do a little Columbo routine, scratching my head. And I say, I look back on my career and there are a few things I wonder if I handled them correctly. Can I throw one out you would not believe that one story. What do you do?
Yeah.
I've watched people slam their books together, get up and march out of class.
Wow.
Because they cannot believe what one of their classmates said they would do in that situation. It split. And I've done it from Columbia Business School to the University of Mississippi. Yeah, the West Coast. I've done it all over the country. And over time, it's changed as the complexion of the class has changed and we have more internet. If you're from Sri Lanka or you're from Malaysia, guess what? Well, yeah, of course. That's how business is conducted.
Whatever it takes, right?
I can't. So that doesn't work in my model, but in where I am, that sort of thing becomes really critical. We have had a principal that said honesty and integrity, Barry wouldn't have done that. But I remember, and I drove into his head, hey, buddy, it's you and me here, 70 stores this year. That's a lot of stores to open. And I'll tell you your review in advance. Did they open on time? Did they open on budget? That's it. So who's complicit there?
Right.
And,
well, I didn't murder anyone, so that's good.
And you didn't tell me I couldn't pay off people if they said that they needed money for a green tag.
Right.
Come on, and he's in his early 30s. It's his first rodeo too.
Right.
So that kind of stuff. Yeah, I love that. And yes, I teach in business. I've taught in business schools. I've given commencement speeches at business schools, done all that stuff.
Great. That's fantastic. All right. Let's talk about the other company that, big one that you ran for a while and sold to FedEx, Kinko's, which I still call Kinko's, by the way. I don't call it FedEx. I call it Kinko's, which
good on you.
Hates me or what, but that's what I call it. So let's talk about how that all came down.
Yes.
And then see the transition.
So actually in my book, That's my favorite job I've ever had. No question. It wins over everything I've ever done. And it wins for a myriad of reasons, not the least of which I'm an entrepreneur. And just to give you a scale of what happened at Kinko's, the 12 months before I started, Kinko's had a negative 11 million EBITDA.
Wow.
My year one, at the end of my 12th month, we had plus 120 million of EBITDA. At the end of year two, we had 180 million of EBITDA. And at the time Fred Smith walked into my office, we were tracking to 240 million of EBITDA in the last 3 months of the year. And so the question really is, whoa, telephone book numbers, how in the heck did that work? And it's actually very easy to describe, but I'm very proud of myself for figuring this out. A PE firm bought it, and the PE firm was full of operators who came out of Emerson Electric. They came out of IBM. Jack Welch became an operating partner. He's the guy I did quarterly business reviews with. Mm-hmm. But they're all command and control managers because they ran major global companies, command and control. Kinko's, and I used to call it this at Clayton Dubilier and Rice, it was the People's Republic of Kinko's. That's what it was. An entrepreneurial company started by a crazy ass entrepreneur he would tell everyone, ask me for forgiveness, not permission. And that's how the company grew. And that's how it prospered. And it was highly entrepreneurial. And then a PE firm bought it and no one even noticed what was happening. Mm-hmm. They hired the head of Sam's Club. By the way, this is a great business leader. The guy who took it over from CEO of Sam's Club, but he was a command and control leader. So he would go into a market, he'd tell him what he wanted, and he'd go get on his plane and go to another market. He would assume they were doing it because his whole background and experience was when the CEO comes to town and tells you what to do, you do it. Mm-hmm. When he'd leave town, the district manager would go, we tried that 20 years ago, doesn't work. Keep on keeping on. He won't be back here for another year and I'll handle him next time. So I saw that, and my entrepreneurial roots were screaming at me that this was a company that was being throttled back so hard. They were rebelling and essentially forcing out a CEO by performing poorly. So having seen that, and I also am a big believer, and I write this in the book, Napoleon is generally credited with saying this, though no one can confirm it. But I believe he would have said it anyway. If you want to know what's going on at the front lines, go look. So I start at Kinko's and I say, wait a second. If we've got 1,200 stores, it's like the old X-Files TV show. The answer's out there. I am going to go, and I told everyone, I announced at my first 6 weeks on the job, I was going to travel in all 42 regions of the U.S. because we were all 24-hour day stores. I would run town halls on all 3 shifts in every single market. I would hit as many stores as I could. And I let everyone know in advance. Here's all I'm going to say. What in the heck is wrong? What happened to Kinko's? And number 2, what can we do to fix it? And guess what? By the time you've been in 42 regions, holding over 120 town hall meetings from 1 a.m. to 7 p.m. to 3 p.m. in hotel lobbies, outside the store, wherever, I knew exactly what to do because they told me. So it wasn't hard. It was impossibly difficult if you're command and control. So I had this super guy who I write about, Dan Connors, who was an ex-Bain guy. And we sat down and worked out a plan that was built on what we had heard in the stores. And then we called a meeting of the top 150 managers because no one trusted me. I was another suit. It was, even my background notwithstanding, they're like, oh God, the PE firm, here comes the next guy. We'll get rid of him pretty quickly and go from there. But I showed them through telling them, I listened, here's what we're going to do. I could be it really is important part of leadership to be able to set an aspirational flag on a distant hill and say, that hill is worth taking. We're all going to go for it. We will take casualties. But if we make it to the top of that hill, it'll all be good again. And they all had, as the founder called it, a fraction of the action. And Clayton Dubilier and Rice had not, from the store manager down, bought them out. They had bought out everyone above the store. So we had people all over the country whose financial future rested with this turnaround. So we had this big meeting and I explained it all. And the little speech that I write in total there was the most important single speech of my career. And when I said to them, and I started by saying, we spent 2 days talking about what we were going to do, how we were going to do it, which is a masterclass in itself on specialty stores, but I picked it up in the field. It's not like I dreamed this stuff up. And I said, I know a lot of you people sitting here, there were 150 people. Y'all all think I'm smoking dope. I'm the next batter up. I know, I get it. I get all that. But here's what I'm going to do, because we've now been through the plan. It's your plan. It's our plan. If we make it, we will all be very successful. Any of you who think it is unachievable or stupid or I'm an idiot, get in touch with me in the next 30 days. I will be a one-man gang to ensure that you land on your feet in some other company, but you can't stay here. And I was very clear. And then I said, for all the rest of you who don't come up to me within the next 30 days and don't believe it and are causing trouble in the field, I will find you and personally weed you out of this company. And it got very quiet. And people kind of went, holy shit. People marked time in Kinko's by that speech and by what Paul Orfila did to me in front of 3,500 people at a store managers meeting. He was the founder. I always, when I go into a new company, I always seek out the old guard who've been there before, because I can learn. If you talk to people who founded companies, you can learn what was in their head, what they think is wrong, what they think's right. Paul had been banned from Kinko stores. He'd been told in writing, he'd been told by Clayton Dubler and Rice, you may never set foot in another Kinko store. Wow. I called him and said, let's meet for lunch. And he came to lunch and he was loaded for bear. His jaw was set. He knew he didn't like me before we sat down.
Right.
Well, by 4 that afternoon and into our second bottle of wine, we were becoming pretty good friends. And he realized that I was kind of an entrepreneurial guy. He didn't know about the GameStop stuff. He didn't know about Laura Mercier. And so I said, why don't we meet in Salt Lake City, Utah, where the Olympics was going to happen? And we were guests. My wife and I were guests of Xerox. We were Xerox's largest account in the world. And I said, Paul, why don't you come to Salt Lake City and you and I will go see our stores? And he did that. And cut to the bottom line here, we secretly, Paul and I hatched a plan that I would have him come out with 3,500 team members in Las Vegas for the annual meeting, to have him come out. He hadn't been allowed in the company in over 5 years. And I was going, it was so choreographed down to what he was saying, but I was going to shake hands in the middle of the auditorium. I was going to walk out the way he came in. He was going to go to my podium. The deal was 10 minutes, no more. I was told there's no way he can stick to 10 minutes once he gets started. When I announced him, you've never heard anything like that. Pandemonium, it was chaos. I walked out into the middle of the auditorium. I stuck my hand out. He shook his head no. He grabbed my cheeks. He pulled me in and kissed me squarely on the lips, and not like a light peck, like a kiss on the lips. And I was stunned. The place went bonkers. And I went backstage and they said, I can't believe, they were mad. And I said, are you kidding? We just won. Game over. He has endorsed what we want to do. And he has ensured that everyone knows. He anointed me. Don't you and sure enough, he talked for 30 minutes. He broke every rule he did, but everyone loved him. And he told them, you guys got to listen to Gary. He's onto something here. And so people wonder, how in the hell did this thing get to be such a success? It was all those kinds of factors. But my greatest gig ever.
Sounds like it's a fascinating story and really, really fun too. And honestly, I think the other thread that you have is you can work with people. Like you figure it out. You figure people out. You work really well with people and communicate with people well. And I think that's such a trait that's needed for any kind of leadership.
Oh, in this country, forget work. Everywhere these days, people need to communicate.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate your time. I know we're kind of running out at this point, but I could talk to you for hours. I feel like you have such great stories and insights. Wanted to ask you one last question here and then kind of find out where people can find you. Gary, what do you want? We talked a lot about the book. what's like, if you had to dial it down to one thing, if there's an entrepreneur out there or somebody that's going to try to be a leader, what's the one thing you want people to walk away with from your book?
The one thought is hard work always wins. Hard work leads to competency. Competency leads to respect, and respect leads to a next level job. So I don't care if you're flipping burgers at McDonald's, you better, by gosh, be the best burger flipper. And guess what'll happen? If you get so competent flipping burgers, the store manager is going to say you're a shift leader now. If you attack the shift leader job the way you attack flipping burgers, you're going to find yourself as assistant store manager and then store manager. So there's no secrets. It's hard work, developing skills, getting respected for those skills, and let everything play out from there. And I think that's the headline.
I love that. And I just reminded me of like all the stories that you share in the book. You're literally rolling your sleeves up and to do things like from early on throughout, like you're always rolling your sleeves up, getting dirty and be working, like you said, hard to do whatever it is really well and get to the next level. And I think that's a really great lesson as well. So I appreciate you sharing that today. And your book comes out April 30th.
Yeah, it should be out. It should be out. You know,
by the time people
the next week.
Right.
And
it should be out.
Obviously, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere people get books. And I know we're getting a lot of play into independent bookstores, which is I love because they're small business people, and we need independent bookstores. But that's more hitting. That has to develop that differently than big. But we're absolutely 100% audiobook, ebook, paperback, hardcover, all in Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever people get books on a big scale, but probably at your neighborhood bookstore also.
Great. Gary, really a pleasure. I really thank you for taking the time to talk today, start your podcast. And also, if folks want to know the name of the book, it's Always Learning Lessons on Leveling Up from GameStop to Laura Mercier. Is that correct? Did I say it right that time?
Yes.
Okay. And you also have a new podcast. I just noticed you've got a new Leveling Up podcast, so you can listen to you on the well. You can join that as well and learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah, it's Leveling Up with Gary and Jill, and essentially it's eavesdropping on a mentoring session. Jill and I have worked together for 25 years. We have these mentoring sessions, and and people eavesdrop, and that's essentially what the whole setup is. And they get to listen to us challenge new entrepreneurs or founders or whatever, and it's great fun.
Very cool. That's Laura it's Jill.
Jill.
Louise,
right? The website is GaryandJillPodcast.com.
Right. And her
last wherever you get podcasts.
Louise though, right? So that's her correct.
Jill Lewis.
Lewis. Okay. And it was okay.
Jill Lewis.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so she's also been in the industry for a while. I think she was at was it Perkins Coie?
Yeah, she is the Dallas managing partner for Perkins Coie for here. Right. She's got a very big global. She had to dash from our podcast to go to Korea to close some deal last week. That's Jill being Jill. She's always been that way. She helped me launch Laura Mercier, done all my legal work. I don't make a move in law doing anything unless she's blessed it.
Very cool. So check it out. Very good. Thank you so much, Gary. Appreciate your time. Have a great day and good luck with the launch. And hopefully everyone listening can go check the book out.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
All right. That was an amazing conversation. I think I could talk to him for a lot longer. He's super inspiring. Thank you, Gary, for coming on to start with your podcast and sharing your stories from GameStop to Kinko's to Laura Mercier and beyond. Obviously, some amazing lessons in life, leadership, and innovation as you continue to navigate the business landscape. So appreciate that. And thanks for being here. Hopefully anyone that listened and liked the conversation, please do share it out there, and you can share it to your friends or your loved ones, anybody that you think might be able to apply this to life or to business, and appreciate that. We also love reviews, so please drop them on this podcast when you get a chance or on this video. And obviously it helps us get bubbled up so others can learn from us. So thank you so much for sharing and caring. All right. Well, that's the episode for today. Thank you so much for listening. For those all those out there that have an idea, like a startup idea or want to get something going, it's percolating your brain. Please do it. Get it going. Get it started. Help the world by doing so. And today is the best day to start up. Not tomorrow. Not the next day. Get it going and join our community. And we encourage you to do so because we'll help you via access to support, expert advice, and resources that you might need to get it to the next level. And please go to Startup of Year to join our community today. It's really easy. It's simple. It's free. And until next time, I'm Frank Gruber. Don't forget to hug your loved ones out there and also go out there and make some waves in the world. And good luck starting up. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Startup of the Year podcast. Be sure to subscribe and we'll be back with another episode soon.